Hello. Today we're going to look at the essential question of what makes narrative writing different from other types of writing. And to do so, we're going to look in the content section again. And I know we skipped this last time. We sort of went out of order with the learning targets here, but we're going to go into content number 1. And from now on, instead of saying the specific date to date it, the video will tell you the date that this lesson's for. Please put that date in the box because I may reuse these videos for future years and I want to be able to not get anyone confused. So put the date for today's lesson in the box right there. And let's talk a little bit about this learning target. So this is content learning target number 1, to use narrative techniques such as dialogue, pacing, and description to develop the experiences, events, and characters in your story. So you may at some point need to go back to get these notes and or pause it so that you can take these notes. That's completely acceptable too. So the first thing, dialogue. Dialogue is the part of the story where you have the characters speak. They include 2 parts. They include the words the characters are saying, and that's always going to be in quotation marks. And then it includes what we call a speaker tag, which is the part where you have said so-and-so. Speaker tags are used by authors, but they sometimes can be not used by authors. And sometimes the author chooses not to use a speaker tag. If you're just learning about how to use dialogue, I would recommend to use the speaker tag. If you're comfortable with dialogue, maybe you could get rid of the speaker tag and just have the words themselves. But it really ultimately is something that if it's new to you, you may want to consider using the speaker tag, okay? With the dialogue as well, I've given 3 different examples of ways that you could put dialogue within your piece. So this is quotation mark, and here's what they say. Dialogue goes here, comma, quotation mark, said Joe, period. So in this format, the speaker tag's at the end. The dialogue and the speaker tag are part of one sentence. So you put the period after the speaker tag, not here. Right here goes a comma, okay? And obviously the dialogue's in its quotation marks. If you have the speaker tag at the beginning, it would read, Joe said, comma, quotation mark, dialogue goes here. And then you put the end punctuation mark inside the speaker tag, and then you wrap it up with your quotation mark. The last way that you may see dialogue is where you put the speaker tag in the middle. And in that situation, you would go quotation mark, dialogue, comma, end quotation mark, said Joe, comma, then you start the new quotation mark when they start speaking again, goes here, period, and then you end with the quotation mark. So those are the 3 different ways you're going to see dialogue used. A big tip that you need to know is that dialogue is always its own paragraph, and you change paragraphs when you change speakers. So you can't just put the dialogue all in one separate paragraph. You change paragraphs when you change speakers. You may want to add that note in there. You change paragraphs when you change speakers. And here's an example from the textbook. It doesn't matter how, not the textbook, from a book. It doesn't matter how short your paragraph is. In this book, we have one word, destructive, in quotation marks. We know it's dialogue, but we change speakers. So they say interesting, comma, and quotation mark, I correct. So you need to make sure when you change speakers, even if it's just one word, you have to change paragraphs. Notice I said it's a paragraph, which means it's indented as well, just like a new paragraph indents the beginning of it. You indent when you start your dialogue, even if it doesn't carry over more than one sentence. Also about dialogue, you can put narration with the dialogue and stay in the same paragraph. It's only when a new speaker changes that you need to create and go into new dialogue, okay? So that's one of the big things there. Second thing we're going to talk about is pacing. With pacing, that's the speed of the story. So the more you use description, the slower the story goes. So it causes the reader to have to slow down with the reading and to visualize what you're saying. The less description you use, the faster the story goes. So it's good to limit your description and have a faster pace when you're doing like a quick action scene. This brings us to looking at how you see this in an author's work. So we're going to go into our reading learning targets, and we're going to go into reading learning target under number 3. So date it, today's date. That's analyzing how the structure of the text helps the author develop their ideas. And the structure we're going to look at is the use of pacing, dialogue, and description within the story Rosanna. So within Rosanna, the first thing that we're going to look at is description. Within this story, we have her going to Film Faker's house, and the author develops a visual description of Film Faker's house very, very clearly here, and it slows you down. They tell you the exact number of steps she had to take to go up to that house. All of this causes the reader to slow down and visualize that part. It slows the pacing down because it's loaded and chock full of description. The second area we're going to look at in the structure of this piece is the speaker's use of dialogue. On page 185, you see this back and forth conversation using the proper speaker tags. Rosanna shouted, the quotation's correct. You see we switch speakers, so we switch paragraphs. Notice when we add narration, it's okay to be in the same paragraph, but when we switch speakers, we switch paragraphs. So there's an example of how dialogue's used in Rosanna. And then the last thing, on the very end of Rosanna, we see the pacing of this piece quicken. When Rosanna, it says that, she picks them up, she lifts them in the air, and then she places them down. That action uses a bunch of short sentences, not much description, just really kind of giving the quick active details of that moment, which speeds that pace along a little bit faster. So as you're writing your piece, you really need to consider, are you using dialogue? Because you need to. You need to get that practice of dialogue. So use dialogue, develop your speaker tags, and make sure that you're properly putting them in their own paragraph. Obviously, narration can go with it. And develop your own pace or speed of the story. The more description you use, the slower the story will go. Helps the reader to visualize. The less description you use, the faster the pace will go. And that's good to do in really quick, strong action sequences. Go ahead and get writing.